Hi everyone. Today I'm going to explain some topics like context API and global state management in React. So today we'll focus on understanding how React allows us to manage state globally without the need to pass props down manually through each component. By the end of the session, you'll understand what context API is, how it works, why we use it, its advantages, and real world use cases. And finally, you will see how context helps manage global state with examples like a theme switcher or counter app. So, what is prop drilling? Before context API, if you wanted to share some data across like multiple components, you would have to pass props down through every intermediate component. So imagine you have a user object in your app component. You want to use it in a deeply nested child component. The parent and intermediate components have no use for the user object, but you still have to pass it through each level. This is called prop drilling. So, as the app grows, it becomes messy and repetitive and hard to maintain. So, Context API solves this problem by allowing us to share data globally. So, any component can access it directly without prop drilling. So, what is Context API? Context API is a built-in feature in React that allows you to share data between components without explicitly passing props. Think of a like context as a global storage in your inside your app. Like components that need data can access it directly. It's perfect for shared information like themes, authentication info, language preferences, or a shopping cart. In simple terms, context APIs allows components to subscribe to a global state and react to changes automatically. Let's see how context API works. So there are three main parts of context API. So create context and provider, use context or consume context. So here create context function, this creates a new context object. So think of it as a box which stores some global data. In this provider, this is a component that wraps your app or a part of it. That provided it gives access to the data inside the context and you pass data using a value prop. So coming to consume context or a use context function, this hook is used inside any component to access the data stored in context. So it allows you to read and update the global state without props. So this context is like a cloud storage of your app. That provider is the server that stores the data and components are clients that access the data whenever needed. Without context properly means parents passes props to child through intermediate components. This can become messy for deeply nested components. So with context API, child components can directly access context data. So no need to pass props manually through all components. It will be easier. Let's imagine a theme switcher app that toggles light and dark modes. So the theme value is stored at the top level in a context provider. So the components like a button or a toolbar can read and update the theme directly. No intermediate components need to pass the theme as props. This is the code I have written for theme context JS, and see here toggle theme. It shows the light theme and dark theme. The provider holds the current theme like light or dark theme and a function to toggle it. Any component wrapped by this provider can access the theme using useContext. So when the toggle function is called, the theme updates globally and all subscriber components automatically re-render with the new theme. This eliminates prop drilling and keeps your code cleaner and easier to maintain. As we take real world use cases, so context API is perfect for your global data that multiple components needed, like theme or UI settings, which means we use like dark or light mode and font sizes, color schemes. And coming to authentication, we use user login information and permissions, and languages or localization, which means that displays content in multiple languages. And we use some e-commerce site for a shopping cart. We will be adding some items in that cart, and notifications or alerts. In many apps, we will be getting notifications or alerts that shows messages across multiple components. Basically, whenever multiple components needed access to the same data, so the context API is a good choice. And combining context with use reducer. For simple state, use state works perfectly. But for complex state updates, especially when state depends on previous values, we can use reducer with context. Means use reducer allows you to define a reducer function that specifies how the state updates depends on actions. When combined with context, this becomes a powerful pattern for global state management. For example, if we take a counter app, the counter value is global, and the components like incremental and um, increment or decrement buttons, the dispatch actions, and the reducer updates the global state, and all components using it re-render automatically. Let's see here. As I said, for example, you have taken a counter app. This counter is a global value, and the components like increment and decrement buttons, the dispatch actions, and the reducer updates the global state and all components using re-render automatically. Re-rendering it automatically. So in any context-based app, the structure usually like this: a top-level provider, which means whole state and functions, wraps the app, and there will be intermediate components, which means do not need to pass prompts. And there will be consumer components, use context to access state and functions. These keep on intermediate components do not need to know about the global state at all. So this keeps your app modular and your code clean. And best practices to use context API efficiently is uh, use context only for global or shared data, not every small state. And don't overload a single context with the unrelated values. Split into multiple context if needed. Example like theme context, authentication context, etc. And wrap only the components that need access to avoid unnecessary re-renders. And then combine with use reducer for predictable and maintainable globe state in complex apps. For a simple and deeper understanding, imagine a cloud storage system. So the provider is a cloud server which holds the data, and the value is the which will be storing the data, and use context, this client requesting data. So multiple components can access or update the data simultaneously, and changes reflect everywhere automatically. This is why context API is scalable, avoids prop drilling, and simplifies state management. So in context API allows global state management in React, and this provider shares data, use context consumes state, and this eliminates prop drilling, and it is best for themes, authentication language, shopping carts, and notifications. And this can combine with use reducer for complex state, and keeps context modular and specific for performance and maintainability. So there are some advantages in context API, like it avoids properly, means no need to pass props through every level, and centralized state, which means single source of truth for shared data, and simplify state management, which means reduce need for redux in small apps, and it is lightweight and built in, which means no external library is needed, and it is scoped state, which means different context for different data, and this combines with use reducer, which means structured state management possible, and it improves reusability, that components independent of parent props, and this is dynamic updates, so all consuming components update automatically. So that's the about React of context API. So understand how to manage data globally, why it's important, and how it works under the hood, and use context wisely in your apps to keep your code clean and maintainable and scalable. Thank you.